Hi, everyone. David Parsons here. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. I am happy to have you listening to the show. And I just wanted to say thank you to the people who are contributing to the Patreon. I know there are like a million people asking for money these days for their podcast or, you know, their sick kid or whatever little project they got going on, GoFundMes, Kickstarters, Patreons, etc. But it really means a lot to have some money coming in for the show, and I need more. I'll just say it, I need more. So if you listen to the show, you enjoy it, you want it to keep happening and keep presenting new episodes for you, please consider going to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap and donating some money, even $1 a month. Honestly, I get an email that tells me someone is giving me $1 a month. It's like exciting to me. It means that someone out there cares that I'm putting this show together. So even that is exciting, and I hope to see more of that because, you know, the show costs me money, and at this point, it's more the time issue. I recently moved to California. I'm looking for full-time employment. I do not have that. So, you know, my time should really be spent looking for jobs, but instead I have this program that I want to keep putting up. So I portion out a part of my week every week to try to hit up people for interviews, to conduct interviews, to put the shows together, to promote the show online, et cetera, et cetera. And that is, at this point, really getting in the way of me surviving. So if you have the ability to give me a couple bucks a month, whatever amount you can, that would be awesome. That's at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Again, I know there are a ton of people asking for stuff these days, but you know, I know that from what I've heard, that people listen to the show that appreciate it. You know, the show is, you know, it's true independent media. I'm just a dude with a microphone, and I happen to know a lot of people in academia and a lot of people in the publishing world, writing world, podcast world, because of my my experiences in grad school and teaching. I've been lucky enough to meet a lot of really interesting people, mostly of the radical variety, mostly leaning left, Marxist academic types, writer types. But, you know, having moved to Ventura, California, I am very much looking forward to interviewing a lot of young people here, especially young people who are doing political stuff or who are kind of engaged in whatever new reality needs to come forth, if that can be as vague as possible. I feel like, you know, the Trump thing is a signal for everyone that we're hitting rock bottom here. And we need a whole new arrangement, and I mean socially, economically, politically. So talking to young people for me is really important too, and I want to keep doing that. So anyway, if that means anything to you, think about going to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap. Press the button that says become a patron, and you can donate however much money you want a month. So I'll leave that up to you, but it does mean a lot to me when that happens. So thank you very much for those who are supporting the show. And on to the show today. My guest today is someone who I've been reading for a long time online. His name is Douglas Williams. You know, I don't know how I would describe him. He's kind of a polymath in a lot of ways. I think he would laugh if I described him that way, but you know, he has interest in a lot of different things, but primarily he's a left-wing guy, a political organizer and writer. I think right now he's working on a PhD in political science at Wayne State University in Detroit. And he has, you know, a lot to say about Detroit, a lot to say about American politics, and you know, he's one of those millennials, you know, for lack of a better term, who, you know, he was born in 1985. We talk about how much the Obama election and presidency meant to him, both as a signal of massive changes in America and especially racially. There seemed to be something important, and I think there was and is something important about a black president in 2008. But at the same time, Obama's presidency was also a moment for great feelings of betrayal and disillusionment, particularly for young people. And I think it explains a lot about why we're seeing so much Bernie Sanders support, so much attention and energy going towards, you know, the DSA and other kind of bursts of left-wing activity. So Douglas Williams has been kind of at the forefront of a lot of that stuff, and in the middle of a lot of great internet fights as well. He's kind of notorious for that stuff, and I love it. I really enjoy Douglas Williams and his whole perspective on things. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. You can find more Nostalgia Trap at patreon.com/nostalgiatrap, where you can donate to the show. All the episodes are for free at nostalgiatrap.com. It's on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. I'm at David L. Parsons if If you want to follow me on Twitter, I say a bunch of useless stuff on there, but also share the episodes and other stuff about the show. So again, thank you so much for all the people that support the show and write to me and tell me that it means something to them. That really means a lot to me. So thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. This is me talking with the great Douglas Williams. It's really great to talk to you. I mean, I have followed you on social media for quite a while. When you're on, sometimes you take these little breaks from social media, and we're all trust me, there are people that miss you. There are a lot of people that miss you when you're gone. But it's I on this show I like to talk about like where people are from and where how they got to be where how they are, and you're someone whose social media posts run the gamut from I learned like you talk about hip hop, you talk about cats. But you talk a lot about socialism and the left, and it's just it's a fun follow. But I realize I don't know a whole lot about you. Like I don't really know that much about where you're from and what you're all about. I don't associate you with, and this is a compliment. I don't associate with you with like the kind of like the coastal radicals. You're someone who's spent a lot of time seemingly away from that world and in the center of the country, and I associate you with the South a lot. So, I mean, where are you from originally?
I hail from the beautiful, amazing Commonwealth of Virginia. I hail from Suffolk, which is actually the home of Planters Peanut. There's a big statue of Mr. Peanut in our downtown, and
is that like a life-size statue of Mr. Peanut?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
oh yeah. Suffolk is a place. I was telling somebody about this. The census tract that I grew up in. I remember doing just some like miscellaneous research, wanting to find out more about the place I grew up and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
The median household income for the census tract that I grew up in 1990 was enough that your average sort of household of maybe parents and a kid would qualify for being below the poverty line. Today, my census tract that I grew up in, the median household income is around $80,000.
Wow, that's a shift.
And so. Yeah, well, and what you find is that the people who were in the neighborhood when I grew up there, the people who raised their kids there, the people who were in that neighborhood for decades, a lot of it, if they haven't passed on,
mm-hmm.
They've moved on.
Right.
And their children have moved on. And, it's kind of sad, Suffolk is quickly becoming a sort of bedroom community.
Of what city?
Yeah, like, for folks who live in Norfolk and folks who live in Virginia Beach.
Yeah.
And, for me, I grew up, drinking well water. I grew up hanging my clothes out on the clothesline. I actually had this really bad habit. And I wear my socks for way longer. I wear a pair of socks for longer than they should be worn.
Right.
Because, we didn't really have the money to be constantly washing clothes like...
Yeah.
Twice a week or every week and stuff like that. And so, I always keep that close to me.
Is that, would you describe your upbringing as rural? Was it like a rural existence?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we would go to the field across the street and pick, green beans and stuff like that. My grandmother worked at a farm stand, and my dad, my father worked at the shipyard, Norfolk Naval Shipyard, until he was laid off. That was October 15th, 1993. My dad's name is Luther. My mom, Michelle.
I just want to stop and think. I think it's just amazing because I mark it too in my mind with my father. But like, you remember the date like your dad got laid off. That seems like a particularly important kind of marker in a young man's life. I mean, do you attribute? I mean, it sounds like you had a class consciousness from like growing up. But like, do you attribute that date? Like, what does that date mean to you?
My dad came home. And he was just like, we're going to fight this. And I remember seeing my father on television, with the picket lines at the shipyard. And not just machinists. My dad was a machinist in Shop 13 at Norfolk Naval Shipyard. That was the machinist shop. But other shops at the shipyard that had people who were laid off, they showed out. They had machinist union locals from up and down the eastern seaboard. They showed up. And, when you're that young, I was 8. Having been born in 1985. I was 8 at the time. It doesn't really sort of... I mean, like, you get it. Like, you're rooting your dad on television, stuff like that. But you don't get it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, it is an important moment in my life, because, like my dad spent a couple years, he worked at the local, there's a QVC distributor.
Yep.
Right down the street from the house where, we grew up. And, Dad worked there for a little bit. He ended up going into selling insurance for a few years. And then in 1999, he became education representative of the Midwest Territory. First black person to do so in the 116-year history of the Machinist Union at that time. So, hold on, 113-year history of the Machinist Union at that time.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes me wonder about like, I don't know, because I think of you as someone who's pretty well, I mean, more so than I am. Like, you're pretty well versed in like Marxism and like the kind of like Marxist ideology. I mean, at what point does that stuff enter into your mind at all? Like, when did you come to all that stuff?
So it's funny, my political transition, when I was in high school and sort of shortly after I graduated high school, I guess I would characterize myself, like I was very religious and, I was your typical Southern Black Democrat, which is to say, conservative on social issues like marriage equality and abortion. And then, progressive on those economic issues, and even more so for me, because I saw the power of collective action.
Right.
I saw how that worked in my father's life and the lives of the people he did his education, his labor education stuff with. Every summer, I moved in with my mom because my dad didn't want to disrupt my life too much when he became education representative, because he moved from Virginia to Chicago.
Okay.
So I stayed with my mother for my last 3 years of high school. But over the summers, I would go, with him to all of these trainings. I'll spend the summer in Chicago with him. I got my steward's training certificate from him when I was 15 years old.
Oh, this explains so much, Douglas. This tells me so much about you. So you're like heading up to Chicago in the summertime during high school at 15 years old to get an education in what unions are and how they work.
Yeah, I mean, and meeting people in town. I mean, places as diverse as St. Louis and Milwaukee and Amana, Iowa.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we went to Amana, like the people at the local Amana refrigerating plant, like they showed out, they cooked this meat, a nice good hour meal. And, my dad taught them about things like, a contract is only as good as the level to which you're enforcing it. And sort of making those connections between, listen, you can negotiate the greatest contract in the world, but it still requires just the out and out vigilance of your fellow coworker in order to make sure that the contract's not violated. And so, visiting, the Miners Memorial in Mount Olive, Illinois, and getting to see Mother Jones's grave was, I can't even describe it to you. It's amazing, and
it sounds like your dad has kind of a, not only, I mean, it sounds like you had some connection to the history of labor in the region too. I mean, is your dad? I mean, would you describe your dad as like a? He doesn't sound like a radical. He sounds like someone that's just like a kind of a union person. Is that kind of how you came to that stuff? Yeah.
I mean, my dad is a big old Democrat.
Yeah.
So the thing is that my dad and I both take our lessons from the same woman, and that is my grandmother. And even though, my dad's not necessarily a socialist or a communist or anything like that, the truth of the matter is that my dad has always had his ear to the ground, and he's always had a sense that the organizing is where the community is.
Yeah.
The union is nothing without the community, right? There are people who want to separate, union organizing is this thing over here and community organizing this thing over here. And truly, we are all members of the working class. We are all laborers.
Right.
Right. And Dad, and Grandma taught us, and Dad taught me that there was no separation between the laborer and his community, or the laborer and her community. These are the things that sustain movements.
Yeah.
And sustain successes. And so for me, my dad has always been, even more than he's been a Democrat, he's been a community organizer. And we're community organizers first. And that's how we see that.
I associate you with a kind of localism. Like, I feel like you're someone who very much, I hate to like break it down to like a really annoying like liberal bumper sticker, but like the idea of like, I don't know if you've seen this one, but it says like, think globally, act locally. But like I associate that like that general thrust of that idea with you, like someone who like very much is connected to like what's around you. Like you don't spend most of your time on, like when I see you posting on social media, you're not like really focused on like Trump and Russia and shit like that. You're like focused on like the local and like how that connects to the larger stuff. And it seems like that. I don't know. It seems like that came a little bit from your dad's connection to the community.
I mean, like, what bothers me so much about the focus on Russia is that it's like it's this LARPing Model UN bullshit that I absolutely cannot stand. It's like, look, we have people that are starving. We have stories coming out, seemingly at an increasing rate lately, of people literally dying of poverty, like dying from a lack of resources, dying because the state has forgotten about them, dying because people give way too much care to going on in Moscow as opposed to going on in their backyard. And to be honest, I live in Detroit, man. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Like, I see the effects of sort of unrestrained capital every single day. You know what? On the way home from campus to where I live, I drive by the place where the first Model T rolled off the assembly line in Highland Park, Michigan.
Yep.
Do I know how I know that is the place where that happened? It's a state historical marker because the building is a empty husk.
Yeah.
Like it is.
It's like the history of capitalism is like written in our landmarks everywhere.
Yeah, I tell you what, it's amazing. You will drive through Detroit and the Detroit area, and you'll see like Detroit's in Wayne County. You drive into Wayne County, it's Detroit city limits, Wayne County, an Automation Alley community.
Automation Alley community. That's like super dystopic.
Yeah, like it is. The state literally advertises the fact that we have automated these people out of work.
Yeah. Yep.
Like,
I mean, that's like that's like kind of just a sickening additional slap in the face to people that like the victims of deindustrialization.
It's absolutely amazing. But for me, like, changing this stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And doing the work, like the work I'm doing currently with the Charlevoix Villages Association here in Detroit on the east side, where we're fighting displacement, we're fighting gentrification, and we're fighting the notion of a new Detroit. The truth of the matter is that if you don't lift up, quote unquote, old Detroit, and you don't give all Detroiters the same sort of opportunities, then you're creating one more segregated city in a nation of segregation.
Yeah.
And the truth of the matter is, I mean, the Detroit City Council right now, I believe it was yesterday, voted to give Dan Gilbert approved sites for Dan Gilbert using brownfield transformational tax cuts to the tune something like $250 million. This is, by the way, while we're evicting people for being late on their water bills, and while the city schools are still under an emergency manager, but we're giving money to billionaires to put up new, nice and shiny buildings that are going to drive up, that are going to end up driving people out of their homes that they've been in for decades. Don't talk to me about fucking Russia.
No,
fuck Russia.
No, that sounds familiar, and like that Detroit story. I mean, I want to know, like, how did you get from Virginia to Detroit? I mean, why are you in Detroit? what got you there, and kind of is it connect? I mean, I know you're going to school, like you're in a PhD program for like political science. Is that right?
Yeah.
So how Detroit is such like in the American imagination, I think Detroit is a primary site of a lot of, the politics of the last 40, 50 years. It's connected to so many of the like kind of broad economic changes, but it's also like this place that like people have this like kind of caricature in their head of what Detroit is, this kind of like burned out city. And I think that for the residents of Detroit, the story is obviously very different. So I kind of was curious like how you got to Detroit.
Well, so I graduated from high school in 2002.
Mm-hmm.
My dad got transferred from Chicago to the Twin Cities area.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up moving with my dad for college. I went to Minneapolis Community Technical College. I graduated from high school at 17. And, I wasn't ready for the big city, man. Like, and it was, I struggled in school a bit, not because of anything like related to like cognitive ability. Just, I wasn't going to class, man. Like, I was like, it's downtown Minneapolis, right? So it's like, you got all the major sports teams there, nightclubs, all that stuff. And so I partied, man. And eventually I got my shit together.
That's an important part of personal and intellectual development, I think, too. I think that people don't place enough emphasis on like a period of partying to kind of like cement a lot of politics. But it sounds like it was kind of brief for you.
Yeah, it was, I had the few years where, I did my thing, but then I was like, all right, I need to get back into the school shit. So I ended up, graduating from the University of Minnesota at Morris, a campus in rural western Minnesota. It's the liberal arts branch of the university system. It was the first time I'd ever really experienced something like a town-gown divide.
Right.
And, but it was also, Minnesota was my first real experience with a whole host of, like, cultures around the world. Like, Minneapolis has a very large Somalian population, has a very large Hmong population. Like, and it was a pretty formative experience. Minneapolis broke me out of my conservatism, right?
Like your social conservatism.
Yeah, like it broke me out of sort of, because me and this guy named David at the MCTC Student Senate, we were the only ones that showed up. And so it was this black guy and this gay white man, like, trying to rebuild the student government here. And eventually you're like, what do I hate this man for?
Yeah. That's amazing.
It was just like, why do I feel this way? Like, for what purpose?
Yeah.
And so,
Minnesota, that moment is important for everyone. And it's I feel like it happens in college for a lot of people where they're like, it's such a like sitcom kind of thing where it's like, oh, I was introduced to someone different, and all of a sudden I feel differently now. But like that's true. It like literally works that way, and like your experience sounds like it was exactly that. That
was a very formative sort of thing for me. I graduated from University of Minnesota at Morris. I wanted to space out undergrad to grad school. So I'd applied for this organizing job with AFSCME. And I aced the interview, and, they make you go on like this sort of dry run for a few days to make sure that you're like really, that this is something you really want to do.
Right.
Instead, I ended up doing this sort of spring break thing, right? And where you go and you do union organizing on a campaign, and the campaign in particular that we were working on was the one for the Missouri Home Care Union, which ended up being a merger of AFSCME and SEIU. It's actually my first time in Ferguson, because we organized in the St. Louis area. And what was so amazing to me, like when the uprising in Ferguson happened in 2014, and they showed the photo of the members of the city council, I was like, wait, there are white people in Ferguson?
Yeah.
I was like,
yeah.
I like the entire time I spent doing stuff there, I didn't see any white people. I was like, what? They got a white mayor? How is that possible? So, ended up doing that, met some great people along the way. I thought I was going to get this job, man. I thought I was going to get this job so much. I had already picked out an apartment in downtown St. Louis, amazing, with a view of the Gateway Arch. And a couple of days later, I get the call. I was actually in the center part of the state, in Jefferson City, the state capital, with my dad for the Machinist State Council meeting, and I didn't get the job. And I cried, and my dad usually has like advice to give me, cheer up, Douglas, like, you'll get him next time.
Right.
All he could do, because I was like bawling into his chest, he was like, those motherfuckers.
Oh, God.
And so it was heartbreaking, but I said on a whim, I said, hey, Dad, we got to drive through Columbia anyway. Let's go visit the University of Missouri, just like on a lark.
Right.
Ended up applying there and getting in. Got my MPA there. I went to Alabama for the beginning of my PhD. Alabama will always be the place where I met my wife. And for that reason alone, Alabama has a special place in my heart. But I was deeply unhappy there.
Why Alabama? It was just I mean, I understand you wanted to stay kind of southern, but like, why'd you choose Alabama to go enter a PhD program?
I was impressed by the program. They said they wanted to like build, a stronger program with scholars that were really going to get after it. And I thought I would like Tuscaloosa, and so it's a new experience. I like to be in new places and experience new things.
Yeah.
So I moved to Alabama, and the thing about Alabama, Alabama can be a very radicalizing place.
Yeah.
Either in one direction or the other, and you think you've seen poverty until you're like driving through Alabama's Black Belt. And it's like, oh, okay. This is poverty. Like, this is like being bombarded by poverty, by, just a general, like, this is what, in essence, like class domination looks like.
Yeah, it's like another layer of deprivation.
And so
I think it's really interesting what you just said about that, like the idea that Alabama is a radicalizing place one way or the other. It feels like, I don't know, I'm kind of really intrigued by that idea that like that actually American life can radicalize you one way or the other, and that like populations are actually like swingable that way. I mean, we see that like in our politics now. Like people can like are actually like in the 2016 election, we're torn between Trump and Sanders. And like that idea that like the population can swing between like a radical left and a radical right is kind of fascinating.
Well, because here's what you got to understand about much of the South. So liberals have basically like abandoned.
Yeah, right.
Like that. And so what you have is a situation where that's why, I tend to believe that when the revolution comes, it's going to start in the South. And it's because you have this sort of extreme polarization between sort of the landed gentry of the state,
Right.
right, and that the people who dominate, the affairs of the university, at the state house, and stuff like that. And then you have, again, these entire regions with great people, great food, amazing stories of struggle, but that are very much, regions of deprivation. Mm-hmm. And it's like at a certain point, the shit is going to smack you across, reality is going to smack you across the face. Like I like to tell people, the mind is a powerful tool. Mm. And it can, and you can believe so many things up to a certain point when reality smacks you in the face, because your mind will never be more powerful than reality.
Right.
And it's one of those things where in much of the South, you have this sort of, we're in this moment, this socialism or barbarism moment.
Right.
And but when I lived there, okay, we weren't necessarily there, right? Like, this stuff has accelerated tremendously in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And it's hard being the socialist. Like in your circles or in your political sort of milieu. And it made me deeply unhappy. And so I ended up actually failing my comp. And that was how I ended up leaving the University of Alabama. But a friend that I had met at the National Political Science Conference, like the American Political Science Association, she said, "Why don't you apply to Wayne State and come here and study?" And I'd never been to Detroit before.
That's what I was wondering. Yeah,
I'd never been to Detroit before. I applied, I got in, they offered me a bunch of money, and I said, okay. I drove to Detroit, and I instantly fell in love with it. Yeah. It's just,
I've picked that up from your posting about Detroit, and it just I sense that maybe you weren't from there, but that you had found a place that like kind of spoke to a lot of the different concerns you have, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, Detroit is a place where profound class struggle is happening right now. Mm-hmm. Where a lot of a lot of millionaires and billionaires see the opportunity to make Detroit their sort of playground, right? Much in the same way that these folks looked at New Orleans after Katrina.
It's like a shock doctrine shit.
Yeah, man, Detroit is classic shock doctrine, disaster capitalism type shit.
Oh, that makes sense to me. I mean, that's the image I have in my mind.
But, I think the reason why I think the working class of Detroit is going to make history is because, we're not taking this lying down. When you've been through something like the city is bankrupt.
Right.
Okay. When you've been through a sort of existential event where, the billionaires sort of stepped into that gap. And that's why they have the head start on us.
Yeah, of course.
But, Detroit's always been a city that's been able to bounce back.
Yeah.
And it's always been a city full of people who, are ready to give everything that they have in order to secure a more progressive future.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, this is a city that was electing, people like Ken Cockrell Sr., like communists, to the
Right.
city council. Like Coleman Young was a member of the Young Communist League in his youth. And he was mayor of the city for 20 years. Like, this is a place where if we're going to see a resistance to the sort of the quote unquote like end of history type stuff that they're trying to write in cities like Detroit. This is where we're going to see that battle be fought on as even a level as you can get. And I truly believe that we're going to win in places like this. And that's why I care about.
That makes it. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually.
Yes.
I want to know. Okay, so you're like, you've got this social conservatism that starts to starts to drop away in college as you meet gay people, which is like such a common story. But like, at what point? I mean, because it sounds like your dad's a pretty strong like Southern Democrat type of person. Like, at what point is your At what point do you as a do you realize the Democratic Party's full of shit? Like, it seems like that's a really key moment for a lot of us, that went to the radical left. Like, at what point do you get disillusioned with the Democrats, or when does that split happen?
It hit me in two ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I would say that my dad, I would actually say, I mean, he is a Democrat, and he is from the South, but I wouldn't characterize him
as a Southern Democrat. Yeah, I'm sorry for that slur.
No, I mean, it's good. I would say Dad is sort of a soft social Democrat.
Yeah, okay. That actually makes more sense to me. Yeah.
But the Democratic, disillusionment with Democrats. Because, look, I served in party offices in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
I had a friend that told me when I worked in Alabama, was like, Doug, if you would have stayed here, you'd probably be running your own congressional district organization and I used to.
I want a Douglas Williams congressional district at some point, by the way. So please work on that.
It absolutely makes me shudder now, but it came in two ways, and it had to do with labor.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was, labor pretty much just asked for one thing in exchange for getting Barack Obama elected.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Employee Choice Act.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, the Employee Free Choice Act would have allowed businesses would have had to go to the bargaining table with a unit once they got a majority of cards signed saying that they want a union in the workplace, instead of doing what they do now, which is to say we want an election, and then they purge people from the bargaining unit and they hire all these, $100,000 an hour lawyers in order to do captive audience meetings and all that stuff. When Barack Obama did not fight for that, it basically allowed Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas to basically say, nah, we're not doing this.
Mm.
Right? Senator from Walmart. Right?
Yeah.
So I pissed them.
I don't want to interrupt you, but so far this is a very kind of a story I've heard before. And I include myself in it in some respects. Is the figure of Barack Obama as a kind of disappointment is one part of fueling this shift to radicalism.
I tell you, man, I worked to get Barack Obama elected.
Mm-hmm.
The night that another formative experience in my life was, so about 1 o'clock in the morning, May 14th, 1997. And I was asleep in my bed. I heard some rustling, and I was living with my grandmother at that point. my dad had, been working in insurance, and he lived about an hour and a half away. I heard some rustling, and I'm thinking, it's just my aunt and uncle dropping my cousins off so my grandmother can watch them. But then I said, wait, it's only 1 o'clock in the morning. What? All of a sudden, boom! My bedroom door busts open, and it's a paramedic saying, where's Dorothy Marie Anderson? I said, she's in her bedroom. And I ran to her bedroom, and my grandmother slumped over the side of the bed with the phone that she used to call 911 in one hand, and my albuterol inhaler in the other. She died of a heart attack. Right? That was my little dribble of drool coming down her mouth. And that was the last time I saw her alive.
Right.
I guess she wasn't alive. She was probably dead at that point. My grandmother was a civil rights activist. My grandmother taught my father and I everything that we know about struggle and about being in locking arm in arm with your fellow workers, is that the only way that we beat this shit is together.
Right.
Not individually, not breaking systemic issues to individual stuff, none of that. We win the battles that matter together. And when Barack Obama was elected, because like Grandma and I, I've been reading newspapers since I was in a high chair. So, even at 12 years old, like we were talking politics and all that stuff.
Yeah.
It was just something that seemed so impossible. And it was a great moment for me.
The idea of a black president you're talking about.
Yeah, we not only did we elect Barack Obama, but right before the West Coast polls closed, they called Virginia for Barack Obama.
Yeah.
First Democrat to win Virginia since 1964. I just pointed up at the sky and said, "Yeah, Grandma, that one's for you." And I called my dad.
It blew everyone's mind, dude. It blew everyone's mind. Like, honestly, like I never thought. I mean, I never thought I would see a black president besides Morgan Freeman in disaster movies. As this kind of like in the future, at some point this will happen. and I mean, I was already like a very cynical, like radical person, but I'll never forget like stepping out of the subway in Washington Heights, New York, and realizing that he had won, and like running home and turning on the TV, and like he was accepting it, coming out on stage like that, and like I found myself actually kind of shocked at the tears that were coming out of me, and that's just like pure engine of white guilt. Like a lot of that is just me like feeling like, I don't know, I'm very susceptible to that type of stuff. Like as a white person that got touched like by movies and like shit about like black people, this is the story of America. And like I think a lot of Americans got swept up by that. And it's like it's interesting because it's like the story changed so much over 8 years. But like that moment was extraordinary, and it still is extraordinary. But it also like set up this like kind of like really high expectation that I think that that led to a lot of the kind of, I don't know, burned out people that we saw throughout his 8 years.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you, I called Dad that night. I was only able to get out Grandma. That was the only thing I was able to say. I just started bawling 15 minutes straight.
Dude, that's amazing.
And it was just, I cried when he was reelected too. But it wasn't the same. Like it was just like,
what happened? What happened in those 4 years, Douglas?
Well, so the first wave of disillusionment came with the Employer Free Choice Act, and it felt like not only did Barack Obama like not deliver on this stuff, but then remember in 2010, one of his aides, said to a news station that union, going all in for Bill Halter, who was the challenger to in the Democratic primary. And I was just, it was just like, wow, like,
yeah.
Okay, all right. So 2010, I'm 25 at this point. I'm just sort of like, okay, well, this sucks. But, like, Democrats still better than Republicans, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, of course.
So the final break for me was that to most people would seem like kind of innocuous, right?
Mm.
He nominated a union buster for Starbucks to the D.C. Circuit Court. And I said to myself, you gotta be fucking kidding me right now.
Yeah.
Like, it was such a slap in the face.
Yep.
And it was such a signal that, actually, like, Barack Obama might not give half a fuck about any of us that are struggling to make ends meet paycheck to paycheck.
That's hard. I think that's hard. Like, his presentation is so empathetic, and like a lot of people just have a hard time believing that, like, this guy, really doesn't pull for the working class, because he's so good at like making you feel like he does. But again, like, you're talking about this little like thing that a lot of people would miss, the like appointment of a judge who's a union buster. But like there were so many. I mean, if you were paying attention, like, that's what his whole administration was about. Like, his whole administration was like acting in really appalling ways. And it was such intense. It was so different than his presentation, which was like, I'm like fucking Mr. Social Justice Warrior, and it was just really confusing for people, I think.
Well, the thing is that it was also, Penny Pritzker, whose hotels I believe are still on a do not patron list
right.
by Unite Here in Chicago, right? Whose hotels once turned on heat lamps on picketers outside.
Ugh.
Like, this was the person who was the small business person, the Secretary of Commerce. Like,
yeah. Well, Rahm Emanuel, like his connection to Rahm Emanuel, and when he had like Lawrence Summers and Timothy Geithner and all these motherfuckers in there, that was like just pure, like the people who were the architects of some of the like worst fucking neoliberal policies of the last decade are the people that are placed, in these key positions. All of that shit, just like, I don't know. For people that were paying attention, it was really ugly. I mean, he wrote his lawyers wrote an amicus brief at some point to the Supreme Court that was basically defending Amazon, and like Amazon's like when Amazon was being sued by their workers because they were basically withholding wages for having the workers have to go through this like 1 hour like security debriefing after they left the warehouses. And when I saw that Obama had his lawyers like write an amicus brief in support of Amazon before the Supreme Court even saw that case, that was part of like just being like, wow, like this guy is not only a phony, but like he's like part of he's part of helping the capitalist class like continue to commit these crimes.
And it was like, it's a real sort of gut check.
Yeah.
Moment. Like,
totally.
Like Barack Obama said in 2008, anywhere where there are bosses mistreating their workers, I will put on my walking shoes.
Jesus
and
Christ.
I will march for workers' justice. That motherfucker forgot what his goddamn Foot Locker was.
Yeah.
I ain't see that motherfucker on a picket line one goddamn time.
Yeah, what was it? The Chicago windows. The window, like there was a. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Like there was a Chicago like window company that the union like went on strike.
Window.
There you go. That like it was at the moment when he had been elected. He was a president elect. He hadn't been sworn in yet, And he was like, he made some statement where he was like, I'm 100% in support of this strike and everything. And I was like, wow, this guy might be the real fucking deal. Even though, like, the other part of me was like, no, there isn't a real deal in this position. Like, it just doesn't happen. But, like, he was, that's what makes me feel like, I don't know, the sense of betrayal. I think that a lot of people in American politics don't really get how deep that sense of betrayal is for people on the left and how much he pushed people left. Because it was like, wow, like I'm not going to get this in this, like I'm not going to get this from this guy, and that was enormously disappointing for a lot of people, and pushed it. I mean, his presidency is like what you're talking about with Alabama. Like his presidency basically radicalized people and like pushed them either left or right, and left us with Trump.
And it showed people that at the end of the day, in this country, we have two parties of capital, right? We have.
Thank you. Yes.
We have, the left hand of capital, which is capital with a smile, which is the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
And then you have, bad cop capital, and that's the Republican Party.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where it's why so much of the deliberations about political strategy and so much of the deliberations about 2018, 2020.
Ugh.
And it's just sort of like, if you're putting your eggs in the Democratic basket, as a leftist,
yes,
I have to wonder what version of the last 10 years you've been watching. Because what I've seen is a Democratic president, an administration that was as much an unabashed free trade advocate as any other Republican.
Yep.
Right? I've watched, the droning of the Middle East. I've watched, I still remember in the first, like the budget showdown that characterized Barack Obama's first term in office. Washington, D.C. had passed a bill that allowed for women in the city to access abortion on the public dime. And I remember reading an article where he said to John Boehner, if you give me this, I'll give you abortions in D.C.
Wow.
As if the right of women to their own reproductive health care is something that can be passed off between the two politicians in a backroom negotiation.
Fucking disgusting.
Like it's not just neoliberal. It's not just capitalist. It's anti-human.
Yeah.
We have an anti-human and an anti-empathetic politics.
I think it's that dark. I'm glad I've never heard it characterized that way, but the idea of it being anti-human, that's very resonant.
I mean the class struggle is, at the end of the day, and R.L. Stevens talks about this a good amount on another podcast, the Trillbilly Workers Party. It's part of socialism. Like the end goal, it's not like yes, it's like ending oppression and all that stuff, but it's the liberation of the full extent of our humanity, and that is something that it animates me every day.
Yeah.
When I drive home and I see sex workers selling their wares in 20-degree weather, all of them black, some of them trans. When I see the dope boys trying to get that sale so they can dress their kids nice for school and stuff like that. Like before we undertake any action, we have to ask ourselves, do these people benefit from this?
Yeah.
And if they don't, then why are we doing it? And my co-blogger Brian put that in me a few years ago, and it is now sort of every time I think about something that we like in action, or every time I think about writing a blog post, how does it serve the sort of like specially oppressed, right?
Yeah.
Like race, gender lines and stuff like that. How does it serve them, and how does it inch us closer to liberation?
Yeah.
I gotta be honest, if you think that working within the Democratic Party is going to end up in anything other than frustration, woe, and disappointment, then I don't really know what to tell you. We have to begin to build our own independent,
Yeah, I agree.
like sort of engines of mobilization, our own independent sort of engine of I can't think of a better word for it than liberation. It's what I'm being. And
I mean, how optimistic are you about all that stuff? I mean, I think as someone on the left, you struggle. People on the left always struggle, and this is like something that I've seen as I study like the history of radicalism, and radicals always struggle with like kind of vacillating between a kind of like really intense optimism about like kind of we're going to win this thing, and then a kind of intense pessimism about the kind of like chances of that happening in the context of the historical moment we occupy. Like, do you kind of move back and forth between those feelings of cynicism and pessimism and optimism about the working class's chances, or how do you kind of handle that?
You know what, man? The best thing about being off the internet.
Yes.
The best thing
Tell me,
about
please.
The best thing about disengaging from online spaces is that you really get to see the working class work. Right. And you really get to see them articulate a demand for something better. Now, listen, it might not be called socialism. It might be socialism, right? But it might not be called socialism. Right. But these people, they want a democracy that extends beyond the ballot box. And you hear them talk about this when they show up to city council meetings in Detroit and say, "Look, don't be giving Dan Gilbert $250 million of my motherfucking money."
I love that. I love the city council meetings where people get real raw like that.
Like if he wants to build the tallest building in Michigan or whatever, like let that motherfucker pay for it. Like, and it's just, and it's one of those things where when you're away from online.
Yep.
I mean, look, this played a part in my transformation. Because I mean, like I say, when I started really getting into left stuff, particularly online, probably about 2013-ish. I spoke it real, right? But my reality was shaped by unreality. And politics on the internet is unreality.
Yes.
Like, it's in every sense of the word. And so I was heavy into sort of what we consider identity politics, identitarianism, and all this stuff. And, I started thinking to myself, I started realizing, like, wait, this is not working for me because I'm looking at a political milieu where what marginalized people are essentially, in a way, they're reproducing the same sort of content of domination, particularly when it comes to online discourse, that we're fighting against. And so I turned really hard against that. And the sort of like sock dem bro, like, the only thing that matters is class, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah, I hate those guys.
And I was on this. I was on that shit for probably about a year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah.
What really changed my mind was what really sort of began to bring me to my center were the protests at Mizzou.
Yeah.
And you know, like as a Mizzou alum,
Yeah.
you know, each year I was there, we had a racial incident. You know, the first year of my MPA, there was a Tim McGraw concert at Mizzou Arena, and some people threw cotton balls all over the grounds of the Black Culture Center on campus.
Beautiful. Yeah.
And it was just like, oh, Jesus. Like, and so the campus mobilized against that. The second year, someone spray painted on a statue in front of one of the dorms, Nigger History Month.
Beautiful. Jesus.
And it was just like...
Yeah, that class first shit. I hope that moment has died. I hope we can have a more complicated conversation than that, because like it seems like there were maybe a couple years ago that was really hitting its peak online, where just all these like so smart white guys were telling us that identity politics had ruined the left, and like I think that there's a point that I understand the point that's being made. Like I get how that stuff is mobilized and weaponized in really cynical ways, especially by the Democratic Party. But, you know, I also at the same time, like, got used to seeing the same types of dudes, like, going on and on about identity politics to me. And it just got really, it got to the point where it's like I can't hear the same white guys telling me that race doesn't matter over and over again. It's just like that's not how I was educated, and like I don't know. I'm a white dude with a very different kind of take on race than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know, for me, you know, I saw the demands for Mizzou. It was like, you know, I was so ready to just bash it and just be like,
yeah.
Insufficient. What about class war? Blah.
Sure. Yeah.
And I started thinking about this shit, and I was like, wait a minute. These people might bring this university to its knees and force it for the first time to really, really address systemic racism on campus.
Yeah.
You know what happened after the second incident at Mizzou? They founded an organization called One Mizzou. And I remember seeing the list of people who were involved in it and the people who were speaking to like local media about it when I was living in Columbia. And I went to one person's page and she's got like Rush Limbaugh shit all over her page.
Oh,
I'm
God.
like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, I see where this is heading. One Mizzou, by the time you come up on 2 years after that incident, One Mizzou is now the branding exercise for the entire university. It's the shit that they run on Saturdays for college football advertisements. And so I said, they can't brand this away though.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is some real ass shit that's going on right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, I started thinking to myself, it's like, damn, what if I had this shit all fucked up?
Yep.
What if my reaction to identity politics isn't actually necessarily about identity, but the sort of radical, again, like as R.L. Stevens puts it in that podcast, chauvinism that exists largely in online spaces.
Yeah.
And I stepped back and I'm like, oh, so wait, you mean to tell me like, race mediates class and class mediates race? Oh, wait a minute, there's some interplay here.
Yeah.
And it's just like, it's a learning process.
And the interplay is the whole story. You know what I mean? Like the interplay seems to me like that's the history of the United States, is the interplay between racial politics and capitalism, the way those two things have interacted. That's why when I hear people saying like we need to pay attention to class and that'll take care of race, they just don't get it. Like they're not really addressing that the issue is that's what makes it so complicated. Like that's what makes like taking on American history and American politics so complicated is because we've got this very particular racial politics that's been a part of our history forever. And the way that it interacts with the structures of economics is the whole story.
Yeah, I mean, the notion, like, sometimes I take the back ways of like scenic route through upstate New York when I'm coming out here to visit Sarah. And you see these signs out here that say no sovereign nation, no reservation. And it's by this group called quote unquote Upstate Citizens for Equality. And it's basically, contesting the Seneca and Cayuga land claims.
Right.
Now listen.
Jesus.
It's reactionary shit. But what makes it even more interesting is the fact that I believe this case was resolved in their favor something like 6 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's not appealed. So this is a cultural marker at this point. This is no longer I am signaling my opposition to this event. This is now as much of a cultural marker as the white folks, Northwest Pennsylvania, where my brother-in-law lives, flying their Confederate flag. Let me tell you something. You would not believe that Erie County, Pennsylvania gave so many men to the lost cause. As you would driving around and seeing all these Confederate flags.
Dude, I live in Southern California, and like Southern California is filled with Confederate flags. Like I see it everywhere, and it's just kind of like, what the fuck?
It's like,
it's so clear that it's a racial thing. Like, California, we didn't fight in the Civil War, but we got people who believe in the Confederacy here. It's disturbing as shit.
It's like, bro, there's not a social democratic program that's going to make people say, well, anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that.
These are things
I think that's an important thing to point out.
Be dealt with in concert, in coalition.
Yep.
Not just one or the other.
It's one project, but that's a like really integral part of it. In fact, I would say that it's like the most vital part of it is like addressing. I mean, what you said about like the kind of like anti-human politics of neoliberalism or conservatives or whatever. Like if we want to imagine like a real utopic future, or a real like humanistic future, the racial element of our society has to be addressed at the same time as the economic. I mean, that seems obvious. It's kind of bizarre to me that people split it up.
And whenever I see these sort of debates about identity politics, and I'm always suspicious about left debates about identity politics. Not the sort of like Mark Lilla bullshit in the New York Times, but actual leftists debating actual identity politics and this stuff. I always get suspicious because here in Detroit, nobody talking about this shit.
Yeah,
ain't nobody like these debates only exist within the unreality of online discourse.
Yeah, no,
I
know.
And for me, like if that's where if that's where our sort of analysis, and that is where our rebuttals are to that unreality, then your solution also won't make any sense to anybody that actually has to live 5 seconds as a member of the working class in this society. And it's sort of like the things that people are talking about in this city is, when are they going to build public transit that actually reaches the entire city and that's actually reliable? When are we going to see the kind of development that the people downtown and in Midtown Detroit see? And not only when are we going to see that development, but when are we going to have the kind of say in the development that comes here?
Yeah.
that people like Dan Gilbert and Mike Ilitch and all these folks have, when are we going to be seen as not a sort of abstract, we're doing good for the people, but something real and tangible that our communities matter too.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is where, as a socialist, that is where I have to root my understanding of movement. That's where I have to root my understanding of tactics. That's where I have to root my understanding of strategy. I have to root it in ensuring that the working class, and not just Detroit, but all over, that we crush a system that says that we are no more than consumers. We are no more than faithless workers producing, useless goods that no one fucking needs. That is where my analysis has to be. And listen, I'm someone that's been hurt by people who I consider to be, on the same team as me, as well as,
welcome to the radical left, Douglas.
Yeah, I mean, it's
dirty out there. It's a dirty business out there, and the online shit, and the fact that the left is becoming, a brandable enterprise is part of that too. And the idea that there are people that are trying to make careers out of this, trying to build brands, and basically become entrepreneurs of the left, which is its own danger. I mean, I think that you've done us a service in some respects here, in just pointing out that the online world of the left and the online politics is just is kind of a trap in a lot of ways. That keeps you, in a lot of ways, very distant from the people the left is ostensibly trying to help, and the left is ostensibly trying to build is this working class that's far from that snarky online 30,000 followers on Twitter bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, it is. If the left is rooted in something other than community, the left is rooted in something other than the day-to-day pain.
Yeah.
The day-to-day pain that people experience. Like, capitalism for the working class is a life or death thing.
Yes.
And to me, look, Sarah Kendzior once, randomly DM'd people and told people that I was threatening them. Of course, it was all bullshit.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing is, it's like, I've been hurt by online too. And you know what? To an extent, I get it. Because seeing these people prosper is sort of like, it hits at, I was bullied as a kid. And so unfairness is something that was
and justice and anger. I mean, I was bullied as a kid too, Douglas, and because this whole show, Nostalgia Trap, I think a lot about kind of the connections between your personal experiences and your politics, and being bullied as a kid probably explains so much of my anger and my sense of justice. And it sounds like that was a part of your experience too.
Oh, it is. It made me a very angry person. It made me
use the
very
anger.
Yeah, but it also made me a person that saw the sort of hand of unfairness.
Yeah,
and what.
Yes.
And to me, it's like, I get being mad at online folks who do nothing but talk shit and do all that stuff, because you see them getting gigs, you see them being listened to, and it hits at your sense of unfairness.
Yes.
That these people have bullied people, and that these people continue to get rewarded for it because whatever.
It shows you how elites survive. You know what I mean? Even the left has its elites.
But at the same time, the thing is that there are some unfair things particularly when it's on such a micro level as online stuff. There's just some of that shit you gotta let go.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
And when your analysis, you gotta start boxing at things that actually exist and not boxing at shadows.
Yeah.
Whenever, and so for me, being off the internet, and this is something that, I tell any organizer, like, do not, if someone comes into your office saying, or somebody comes to your event saying, I want to do social media, and I only want to do social media, look at that person and be like, okay, but why are you actually here? Who are you actually trying to help?
Yep.
Because the struggle, my friend, is not anywhere. It's not through a computer.
Yep.
It's not through a phone. The struggle is out here in the street.
It's always been.
And Heather Heyer being murdered, if the rising tide of fascism that's claimed the lives of folks like Richard Collins III in College Park, Maryland, or the two, lost souls that were on the train in Portland. If this stuff isn't enough to wake you up, and to have you actually go outside and smell the goddamn struggle, then I don't know what will.
Yeah,
like we are in a time of crisis.
Yep.
We are in a time of emergency, and we have to have all hands on deck. Otherwise, what the fuck are we doing here?
Douglas Williams, you have given me so many quotable quotes on this talk. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it. I hope we get to talk again very soon.
Absolutely. And again, I want to shout out the Charlevoix Villages Association and all the folks engaged in the people's struggle in the city of Detroit. If folks want to, if you like some of the things that I've said, you might like some of the things that I write. So I write at the South Lawn, which is the southlawn.org. And if you doubly like it, you might want to donate to our Patreon site as well. And you can find that on the southlawn.org/Patreon.
Southlawn.org, always amazing stuff. Douglas Williams, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your presence online. I know that online is a struggle for you, as it is for many of us, but your presence is really appreciated, and I thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
All right, I want to thank my guest, Douglas Williams. I had a wonderful time talking to him on the eve of Thanksgiving. So I hope you enjoyed that. You can find more Nostalgia Trap stuff all over the web, primarily at nostalgiatrap.com, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter is at David L. Parsons, and of course, if you have the money and the inclination, go to patreon.com/nostalgiatrap, press the Become a Patron button, and give a little money to the show and keep this stuff on the air, because I think it's unique and important, and I hope you do too. So thanks so much, and we will talk to you next time.